All right, so before we move on to solving quadratics, I actually want to make a very important distinction back up here with difference of squares. Right here. Okay, so difference of squares. Here's the thing. Notice, all right, I said difference of squares. I did not at any point say the sum of squares. So you can never factor a sum of squares. Never, ever, 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 ever. I cannot stress this enough. There will be one given to you on some type of assessment as a trick question or a question to trip you up. You cannot take the sum of two squares. I'm going to show you why really quickly. X squared plus 25. You might look at it and go, oh, it's a square. So I'm going to try to take the square root so that I get x plus 5 and x minus 5. Oh, well, that should work, right? Except if I remember doing the math and I get x squared plus 5x, and then I get minus 5x minus 25, I still end up with two terms in the middle that will cancel each other out, and I'm still going to end up with an x squared minus 25, which was not my starting problem of x squared plus 25. Okay, you will never be able to take and factor a sum of squares. So I hope I harped on this enough that you will not get tripped up on this on any assessments in the future. All right, so now we're going to go back down to question 10. Okay. It says, let's explore 4 different ways to solve a quadratic equation. Now, very important. If I tell you to factor, you must solve it by factoring. If I tell you to do it by extracting the square root, you must do it by extracting the square root, by using a graphing utility, or by using the quadratic formula. If I give you a method, you must use that method. So, that being said, let's look at the very first one. It says solve the quadratic equation by factoring. All right, so very important. Factoring. I know that in order to factor, I have to figure out, okay, what is it? It is a difference of squares. Perfect. So I know that whenever I do it, I'm going to get an x, I get an x minus 4, x plus 4 equals 0. Well, how in the world do I solve that? Do I move the factors to the other side or anything like that? No, I do not. What I'm going to end up doing is I set both of them equal to 0. So I get x minus 4 equals 0, and I go x plus 4 equals 0. So I say x is equal to, don't want to jump the gun. I add 4 to both sides to solve. So I get x equals 4. Move 4 to the other side by subtraction. So I get x equals negative 4. So when I go to write my answer, I get x equals plus or minus 4. So I said to solve by factoring, meaning I had to factor. Then set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Now, part B, it says solve the quadratic equation by extracting the square roots. Well, what in the world does that mean? It means I'm going to actually solve by good old methods. So extracting the square root. To solve this equation, I'm going to add 16 to both sides, so that I get x squared is equal to 16. Well, how do I get rid of an x squared? Well, I take the square root. so that I get x equals, remember, I don't know if it was a positive 4 that was squared or a negative 4 that was squared, so it's plus or minus 4. Now, the last one. I want you to use a graphing utility, meaning you have to have a graphing calculator. Remember, we tend to use TI-83 graphing calculators. You can use a TI-83 or a TI-83 plus. All right. So, in order to do this, you are going to go to your calculator. So give me just a second while I get my calculator set up for you with my graphing calculator. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let me move this around so you can see it. I'm going to go to y equals in my calculator, and I'm going to put in x squared minus 16, and I'm going to hit graph. And I'm going to take a look at it, and I notice, what does it mean by solve with a graphing utility? I want to know, where does it cross the x-axis? Okay, so I'm looking for the zeros. Okay, so I'm going to calculate the zeros. If you remember, to calculate the zeros, we hit second calc. You're going to go down to 0. And we're going to start on the left and the right. So I got to find my cursor for a second. Oh, there it is. All right, so we always read from left to right. So we're going to go to the top left, hit enter. And then we go below the line, hit enter, enter, because we never like a guess. We want it exact so that we get -40 for 1. And then I'm going to, again, I'm going to do second calc, 0, enter, and again, I'm going to go to the other side, but because I'm going left to right, it starts below my line. So I hit enter, and then I go above my line. Enter, enter again, because I don't do a guess, so that I get a +40. Now, another way you could have done that with your calculator is you could hit second graph, and you'll see a table, and you're looking for, where is x 0? Well, I see one at a +4, and if you keep going to the other side, you see one at a -4. Right? This is very important when we end up getting decimals or irrational numbers and things along those lines. So, when it says use a graphing utility, you want to plug it into y equals, and you're going to hit second calc, and you're going to do 0. Now, the last one, we want to do solving using the quadratic equation. Well, sorry, we're going to solve the quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. So we need to remember what the quadratic formula is. So I have, my quadratic formula is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You also need to remember, though, that it's set up as, our quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? This will help us to remember that our a in this equation is a 1. Right? Our lead number in the very front is a 1. We don't have a b. There is no x for us to look at. Our c is, sorry, if we don't have a b, we use 0. And our c is a -16. So those are all the numbers that we're going to use to plug into our equation. So it asks -b. Well, b is 0, so -0 plus or minus the square root of It says b squared. Well, that's 0 squared. Minus 4, a is a 1, c is a negative 16. All over 2, a is 1. Negative 0, well, that doesn't really matter. So I don't really care about him. I get a plus or minus. 0 squared is 0, so I'm not worried about him. Negative 4 times 1 is a negative 4 times a negative 16. All over 2 times 1 is just 2. So I'm going to take it a step further. I have plus or minus square root. Negative 4 times a negative 16 is a 64. Or actually, I could have also left it as that 4 times 16, but it's okay. You're going to look at it as 64 over 2. Well, what is the square root of 64? It is plus or minus 8 over 2. 8 divided by 2, well, that is my plus or minus 4. Now, if all else fails, what method will work for any quadratic equation at all? It is always going to be the quadratic formula. If you just absolutely cannot remember how to factor, then you need to solve it by using the quadratic formula. Now, 12. It says, explain when you can use each method of solving. Well, factoring. Well, the only time that we can solve it with factoring is, well, when it's factorable. Okay, if you come to a problem that you just absolutely cannot figure out how to factor it, then you have to use the quadratic formula. So we factor when it's factorable. When do we use the square root method? Well, when it's a perfect square. So it's a perfect square so that we square the terms on both sides. Of the equal sign, which is exactly what we did above. When can we use graphing? Well, graphing is anytime. When can I use the quadratic formula? Again, that's anytime. However, if I say I want you to use a specific method, you have to use that method. Same with your 171 instructor. If he says you have to use one particular method, you must use that method. But if you're not given any instructions on how to solve it, use whatever method you absolutely know will work.